Hey gang, it's David again, back to you with yet another Adobe Xd tutorial. And in this one, we're going to take a look at actually two tools, which is the rectangle and the ellipse tools. So if that's something that you're interested in, just keep watching. So first, let's take a look at the rectangle tool. Now it sits here right beneath the select tool. And by the way, if you don't know how to use the select tool, you can always check out my video just on that tool. So the rectangle tool has a default shortcut of letter R. At the beginning, it seems like a very simple, like somewhat uninspiring tool. I mean, if you just click with it, you're going to create a rectangle basically like this one. If you hold down the Shift key and click, you're going to create a perfect square. And if you're going to click and drag and then just press and hold down the Alt key or Option if you're on a Mac, you're going to start the transformation from the center spot. So you can use a rectangle as like a background for your section, like like in this case, this guy right here, this background shape basically was created with the rectangle tool. And well, this whole design is actually part of my course on Adobe Xd, to which you will find the link in the description of this video. So with the rectangle tool, of course, you can create background shapes, but also shapes that would encompass your images. But before we move on to that, let me just quickly show you one difference that you can observe when you create shapes like these. For instance, with the rectangle tool. I mean, once you create a shape, you can see that right now we got these handles right here in the corners. That means that this shape is like a dynamic shape at this point. We can just click and drag on these points to simply change the roundness values of our corners. And when we do that, you can see that all the corners are changing their radii. However, if I just alt click on one, you can see, or option click if you're on a Mac, you can see that I'm simply changing the roundness value of just one selected corner. And that change, by the way, is reflected in the properties inspector. So if I click and drag, you can see that right here, this round corner value is changing, and it's changing simultaneously for all the corners. However, if I click on this guy right here that says different radius for each corner, you can see that right now we got 4 different values for different corners. And it goes like in a clockwise direction. So first we got the top left corner, then we got the bottom the top right corner, then we got the bottom right corner, and then we got the bottom left corner. So if you want to just change, let's say, the roundness of the top corners, but you want to leave the bottom ones intact, you can simply just type in 0 for the bottom corners, and your shape is gonna look something like this. So this is when you have your shape still in the dynamic mode. But if you just grab the select tool and just double click inside, you can see that basically we can now manipulate the anchor points. And again, if you don't know how to do it, you can just refer back to my select tool video where I explain how to manipulate anchor points with the select tool. But with the rectangle tool, what's specific about these anchor points, it's actually kind of like a funky thing. If we just create a perfect square, and I'm of course holding down the Shift key, and then with the select tool, if we just double click inside and start now double clicking on the corners, you can see that we are changing the roundness of these path segments. So you could create like a, I don't know, maybe like a cartoon hat very quickly like this. But if we continue on clicking these elements, you can see that we are basically turning this this rectangle into a perfect ellipse that you can, by the way, check in the properties inspector. You can see that the size for the height and for the width is exactly the same. And again, if we just double click again, we're gonna revert the whole process till we are left with a perfect square. But I think that the best use of the rectangle tool is when you want to create image containers for your elements. So like in here, I have like blog post excerpts. So let me just maybe clone these guys down. I'm just going to clone them maybe like somewhere here. Maybe this guy needs to go I think it's this element. It needs to go just a bit down. Let's put it somewhere here, and I'm gonna bring this guy up here, and I'm just going to get rid of these elements. I'm double clicking on these. So now if I just grab the rectangle tool and I create like a rectangle that's going to look more or less like this, let's say that this is enough. So right now we can use this guy as basically like a clipping mask for an image, and we can add an image to it in basically in two ways. So the first one is I'm just going to grab an image from my hard drive and simply drag it onto my clipping path, well, like a rectangle that becomes a clipping path. So right now you can see that this image is being constrained to my rectangle, but I can simply double click inside and I can move it around. Of course, I can make it bigger if I want to, but that image is still, well, it's always staying within the bounding box of our rectangle. So maybe I'm just going to move it somewhere here. So this would be like one way of adding an image inside right here. So we can also again grab the rectangle tool and try to create another rectangle. Let's say that it's going to be something like this. This should be enough. I'm not trying to be pixel perfect right here, but right now we can simply use one of the plugins that allow you to search for images. I'm usually using Pexels, and let's type in something like maybe beach, and I'm just gonna click on this guy, and as you can see, that image is quickly being added to my bounding box, basically to my rectangle. And again, you can simply manipulate, like change the size of your rectangle, and as you can see, that image is being nicely adapted, like automatically adapted to the rectangle. And same rules apply to our ellipses. The same tricks that you use with the rectangle tool. So if we just click and drag, we're going to create an ellipse. Click and drag and add the Shift key, create a perfect ellipse. Add the Alt key or Option if you're on a Mac, you're going to create an ellipse from the center spot. If we have a perfect ellipse like this one, and we can see that there's not much really we can do about it in terms of, like adding some kind of effects right here in the properties inspector, like we could with the rectangle tool. But again, if we just double click inside with the ellipse, with the select tool, we're gonna like enter the path mode, so to speak, and we can add anchor points to our ellipse as well. And if we again just double click on these default anchor points, you can see that we are basically modifying this shape to make it look like this, and ultimately it's going to be like a perfect square. And of course, ellipses can also be used to create clipping masks. So again, if we just select it and just bring over our image, you can see that we are constraining our image to this. Well, basically this shape is constraining our image, so it looks ultimately like this. So there you go. This is how you can use the rectangle and the ellipse tools. I think that they are pretty easy to use and quite useful. And I usually use them to create like backgrounds and clipping masks for my designs. And this is what I encourage you to at least try as well. So as always, until next time, thanks for watching and have a nice design.